Right, we're going to go on to the main event. CM Punk on MMA Hour. You watched it. I watched it. We're going to go through uh, sort of the keynotes of it all. We're going to react to some of the things that he said, and we're going to take it from there. So Ariel Helwani, I thought he did a great job interviewing as well. I thought Ariel did a really good job interviewing. There's one
Yeah.
thing that I wish he picked up on that he didn't, but other than that, I thought he did a great job. So I'll tell you what it is when we get there. So the
Okay.
notes from the interview, I'm going to rattle through a few, and then I'm going to, you jump in, of course. Notes: Cody Rhodes was always meant to win the Royal Rumble. There wasn't an audible called after CM Punk's other triceps then tears, and the plan was always going to be that Punk was going to wrestle Seth Rollins for the Raw Championship at WrestleMania 40. I mean, there's nothing that we didn't really know there. Nick Khan didn't know Punk didn't have a no compete clause after leaving AEW because Nick Khan, according to him, would have said, "Well, crikey, I would have just called you the next day if I'd known." But Nick Khan called him on a Monday, the Monday before Survivor Series, and then 5 days they've hashed out a contract, and he goes out, does the big theme song and everything like that, gets a huge ovation, and we're there.
When did CM Punk show up in Chicago and was asked to leave by Vince?
That was back in May. We're actually, in fact, we're going to come to it straight now. The backstage incident where he was thrown out of the Raw backstage in Chicago. Is it the Allstate Arena in Chicago?
Yep, I'll state.
Yeah. And waited. I'm sorry. So apparently he said it wasn't a big deal. He talked to a few people after talking to Jason Jordan, who at one point was briefly Kurt Angle's son for some reason. And then he got injured and then he became an agent. And then Bailey ended up being the one to invite him, I think, backstage to the show. Talks to a few people, nods at Triple H, and then Vince McMahon, who was operating through Zoom remotely, gets wind of it and then makes the call to throw him out. Tony Khan's reaction, apparently, to this was very negative and, to top AEW brass. And Punk, quotes, said the word that he heard more than any other was betrayed, as in Punk had betrayed AEW by going backstage to a WWE show. Is that
Hey,
is that heavy-handed for you, or
it's a wrestling business. He didn't have a non-compete.
well, he wasn't competing; he was just visiting friends. He wasn't going on TV or
Yeah,
anything.
but I'm saying it was a non-compete means that, I mean, they could interpret that way. He went to the show and people picked up on it. Fans took a picture of him, and everybody saw him standing out in the parking lot talking to one of the Rock's cousins, I guess. What was her name?
Oh, was it Tamina?
Yeah, talking to her. Then he went in the building for a while, right?
Yeah, and then he was
Then they asked him to
asked.
leave
Yeah,
because Vince didn't want any trouble from with AEW, like they're tampering, like they're tampering with a with a talent, which they, but he does have something in his contract about that. But uh,
yeah. I mean, at
it's
this point, I don't even know if AEW or Tony Khan had reached out to CM Punk after the injury. I think they probably had by that point, but we'll get to this later. But after,
but I
um,
thought CM Punk, when he went there, he was still actively working for AEW.
yeah, he was still under contract with AEW, but this was in that very long period in between him injuring his triceps, brawl out, and then he was on the shelf for 9 months. So this was during the point he was still on the shelf in like May, I
Okay.
think. So he then says he saw Vince McMahon once at Titan Towers, then never saw him again. Unlike Cena and Nash and Foley and others who have been, as we actually said, for a reason as well in John Cena's case, overly kind to Vince McMahon in regards to the alleged offences. Punk gives a pretty definitive sentiment about McMahon is that his thoughts are with the victims of McMahon's, and he essentially has nothing positive to say about McMahon. But then Punk also references Chris Benoit, and he says he saw Chris Benoit in the locker room the week before the murder suicide, where Chris's son Daniel was taping his fist like Punk in tribute to him, and it's a really fond memory of his. And then a week happens and Benoit kills himself and his family. And Punk is like, well, yeah, that was a really nice memory, but then Benoit's ruined it. And it doesn't, I had a lot of respect for him, but he killed his family. I cannot have respect for this guy.
Mm-hmm.
And because you thought, yeah, exactly, because you thought a person was one thing and they turn out to be another, then at least in his mind, you can't really feel affection for that guy anymore. And a lot of people still feel affection for Vince, etc. I want to follow with this, and this sort of relates to it. With Chris Benoit, you'll of course remember in 2000, like June 2007 or July 2007, the shockwaves that the Benoit murder suicide sent through the wrestling world and the wider world. In fact, it was headline news even here.
Yep.
Just how close do you believe that Chris Benoit's actions came to inadvertently taking down the wrestling business in the aftermath? Because people have said he could have destroyed the business. That's how serious his actions were.
He couldn't have destroyed the business. I mean, what he did was horrible. Killed his old lady first, didn't he? Didn't he kill the old lady first?
Yeah.
Then he killed his boy the next day, right?
Yeah.
Which goes to show you that he was nuts, legitimately crazy. And I don't know if he had CTE. They said he did. I first met him in Calgary, I don't know, back in the 90s. And I looked down there and he came up and he introduced himself. But I asked somebody, I said, who is that guy? And they said, oh, he's Chris Benoit. And I just heard the name because I think he'd made some shots with the Paul Heyman group, ECW.
Yeah.
So, but he really didn't look like, he looked odd. Because if you really look at him in the face, he's a weird looking guy. He's not tall. He's about 5'7", 5'8", maybe. And maybe he would be 200 pounds, not much over that. But I don't think it would have brought the wrestling business down. Hey, the wrestling business has lived through tragedies like this before. I mean, that's almost like saying, well, somebody that does something in auto racing, I'm not going to bring auto racing down. That was just what he did. Or if he's a big star in basketball and he does something. No, it's not going to affect the game. It affects the person. But I don't think that it would hurt pro wrestling at all.
Do you think?
I mean, it doesn't
WWE
help it. That's for damn sure.
No.
But I don't think it'd take it down.
Well, maybe not the wrestling business as a whole, because nothing can kill the wrestling business, as we've discussed before. But
because we've tried for 50 years to kill this business, and guess what? We still can't do it.
Do you think?
And they're still trying.
Oh yeah,
still trying.
Do you think WWE could have been taken off air over it? Do you think that was ever likely?
I think, hey, because whatever network they were on, listen, the TV business is like the wrestling business. It's cutthroat. And if they were on USA then, they've been on USA if USA had cut them loose, no, they're not going to cut loose a client like WWE. And guess how long it would have taken for another network to pick it up?
Seconds,
absolutely. They said, hey, okay. And I think it'd be a big legal struggle back and forth, because they were taking the livelihood away from 400 people on the actions of one. Huh?
Yeah, more I'd say, with all the office staff and yeah.
And I don't know, but no. I always and he was another guy that I was kind of not at peace with being around. I never talked to him much, and I was around him a little bit. It was just, hey, how you doing? And I'm moving on somewhere else.
You with TNA booking at the time in 2007. Now WWE over the course of the next year, it starts to go PG. Obviously, it coincides with Linda McMahon running for Senate, as I said before, whatever she ran for. And they also, as we discussed earlier, stopped blood,
Hmm.
completely erased like weapon shots to the head, or especially like chair shots, anything hard, like nothing like a cookie tray or something like that, I guess. But did TNA implement any changes like, no more weapon shots to the head? Essentially, like concussion management, or was TNA was just
It
like it was a
wasn't
free for all?
TNA that put the hiatus on it. It was Spike TV.
Was it really?
Oh, they said no blood, no touching women.
Hmm.
And I'm thinking, and look at it now. Guys, hell, you got guys fighting women now, wrestling women, racing them, running the long distance races. so we couldn't do anything with women. Couldn't even touch them because, oh, that was a no-no. We're not going to do that. Spike TV, I'm thinking, come on, give it to me. I mean, they weren't that hot of a network anyway. And they were pretty good to TNA, but uh the thing with blood, we didn't get it then either. Now you were talking about when the Rock took Cody outside in the big truck, and there
I
was
was, yeah.
Stone Cold's picture and John Cena's picture, and then when he got the blood, he was over there around the front tire of the diesel of the truck, actual truck. And Rock was back about 30 feet. And you could see Cody in the background, but not close. And that's when he got it, which is when they should get it. They did that right. Talking about Punk and Tony Khan, Punk got, we call it color. He got color one night underneath the desk where the commentators were, and the camera went down there and caught him. I went, what in the hell? Why wouldn't Tony say something about that? I mean, that is just, it's just stupid stuff. But he was, the attention was on Rock, like you said, and Cody was over there, getting it ready. And you said you thought it was fake blood at the beginning?
At the beginning, yeah, because it was so red. And then it just kept coming and coming. So then I figured out it was real blood. But
Yeah.
yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
I thought they had a hell of a fight outside. And I've said, but he must be the most hated guy in WWE locker room because not one soul showed up to even help him out afterwards. He was laying there and nobody come to his rescue or even to check on him.
Owes them some money, somebody. With because you mentioned Rock, actually, CM Punk said he's happy the Rock is back, which is sort of ironic because he was very vocal a decade ago about these part-timers taking spots from year-long main events at WrestleMania, but he's got no issues breaking Rock breaking the rules because so does Punk. But now here comes the interesting stuff. All in Wembley. Punk talks about what a stupid idea having the roster split between Collision and Dynamite is because it never would have worked. He said it from the beginning. And before Collision became a thing, when he was still out with the triceps tear, he begged Tony Khan to just fire him instead. Tony refused. And then Jack Perry, who was a known associate of the EV, but Collision happens. And then a few weeks later, Jack Perry turns up to an episode of Collision, and this is where the car thing happens. So, a known associates of the EVPs, the Young Bucks and Adam Page, not that he's an EVP, and Kenny Omega, but they're all part of the same clique. The initial issue was that Jack Perry was yelling at agents, and then the doctor, and then Tony Schiavone about not being allowed to use real glass for a outside vignette where he was told to get a rental car, and then they were going to do something with glass to then, I don't know if he was like going to punch it through or he was going to get put through. It's so late, I just can't remember. Sorry, everybody. But essentially, they were playing with real glass. So,
Yeah.
so in the end, Shivani goes up to Punk and says, "Can you deal with this, please?" And Punk says, "I don't want to deal with this because you won't like the way I handle it." And Shivani was like, "No, you've got to deal with it." So Punk ends up handling it very nicely and says, "Look, there's two reasons. One, this is a rental car, and we don't want to get a bad reputation with the rental agency. And two, you shouldn't be using real glass because it's real glass and it could go disastrously wrong. And there's no reason to risk it. The only other thing is that I can't remember if I said this yet. Jack Perry had a holiday planned and he was going to be gone for a week or two. And that was the reason why he wanted to do it. Here's the thing is that CM Punk's not wrong. Jack Perry's not really wrong here because somebody in the office, I imagine Tony Khan or somebody, told him to get the rental car to then do
Yes.
this glass thing.
Yeah, but see, that's conveniently left out in this whole conversation.
Exactly.
Who told him to do this and who okayed for him to even do the spot? Because Punk knew about it, right? Did
Well, he was made aware of it. Yeah.
Tony Schiavone knew about it, right?
Yep.
See, I think Tony wants to be the boss, but he doesn't want to handle the tough stuff. All he had to do was tell Jack, don't do it. Why don't you do something else? But they told him to get a car, I guess, or would he have gotten don't they drive on the other side of the road in the UK?
Yes, the correct side. Yes.
Wait a minute.
No, but that's not Wembley. This is on Collision a few weeks beforehand.
Okay, he got the car in the States, and this wasn't in Wembley.
No. This is a few weeks beforehand. We'll get to Wembley soon enough.
But when did he say it's real glass, cry me a river or something?
That's Wembley. That's jumping slightly ahead. So just prior, this is a few weeks beforehand with the rental car, and it's confusing because there's two separate rental cars where glass is involved. But the point is that Tony Khan is at every single AEW taping. He's never missed one. So why wouldn't someone just go and get Tony and say, you deal with it? Has he got some sort of mandate where he says, if there's any kind of confrontation, do not include me?
Where were your EVPs?
Well, they were all banned from Collision. They were all had to be on Dynamite to split away from Punk. So essentially, Punk is when he came back, he had two different contracts. One a talent contract and one a contract as a sort of agent official of Collision. So to a point, what he said goes.
Yeah.
So it gets even more complicated. So he's almost the EVP of Collision. The EVPs are only the EVPs of Dynamite now, or maybe Rampage. And then you've got Jack Perry, who the EVPs, he's in with the EVPs and doesn't like CM Punk. It's very confusing.
Well, I've said this before. I think this was all laid out way, way in advance. Punk was going to WWE come hell or high water. And I think he just wanted to be done with AEW anyway. I think he wanted to get fired. I've said that before.
I think he pretty much said it himself in the interview. I don't have the quote for you, sadly, but when I was watching it,
do I get credit for saying that?
You can take the credit.
Thank you very much.
But yeah,
I think he wanted to see. I've said, how many times can I say Tony Khan is not a boss? He just wants to be creative. Now, one day he's going to snap. He's going to get mad at everybody, cuss everybody out. Probably be one of the best things he could do. He needs to show a little authority. And we were talking about it earlier. You cannot be a friend to they call them the boys, the talent. You can't be a friend to the boys and run the show. It doesn't work. It never has worked. Because like you said, all of a sudden there'll be these guys hanging around him, making him laugh, do this, and then he's got an idea. Yeah, we'll go ahead and, and do it. See, Tony, I don't know how he ever envisioned himself as a booker. He just wants to be the booker. Okay. You got $1 billion. You can be a booker. All you got to do is go out and buy talent. If you had $1 billion right now, James, you get on the phone and call these non-committed, some talent.
Free agents.
Yeah, free agent, and call them up and say, hey, we're going to do this. But a lot of them they have issues, and I don't know what happened to Elephant Boy, Jack Perry. I don't know what happened to him, but I think putting him with Punk, I don't think Punk works well with the little smartasses. So
we definitely need Elephant Boy Jack Perry.
yeah, but he was
Jungle Boy.
He went to Japan. When did he drop the Jungle Boy deal?
Apparently, that was at Jim Ross's insistence. He just kept refusing to call him Jungle Boy and use his real name.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, it kept creeping.
Now that should be another booker's decision. That's not an announcer's decision. And Ross was probably doing it for the right reasons, but just to take it on himself, just to, you have to really notice it didn't mean nothing anyway. But I think he wanted to call him Elephant Boy. It didn't fit him or something.
Do you know that was Sabu's first name? I think Sabu the Elephant Boy or something
really?
Like that.
I think it was his name.
Yeah.
But Jim Ross is from the old school. He's from the Bill Watts old school wrestling. And those people in Louisiana and in that part of the country, Memphis, they had tremendous ratings. Memphis beat them all, really, because it was a live show. And you could adjust that show up to the moment you went out on camera. And it was up to date. See, the Mid-South show with Watts and Jim Ross, it was taped. And you had to go with what you had on paper. But Memphis, they had such ratings. I mean, their ratings were astronomical. They would do on Saturday morning what they used to call prime time. They don't really have prime time anymore. TV's undergoing a revolution now. I think streaming and all these other pay to view services are taken away from them. But when you would do a 22 rating, that was what Dallas was getting. But that was in prime time. So, and it wasn't because the wrestling was so good in Memphis. It's just that they had people over and they told a good story.
And they use cars as well in Memphis occasionally with Eddie Gilbert driving. We need to watch that. We need to watch that sometime if we haven't already.
The car with Lawler?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Hey, that was a pretty good bump he took.
No, he's a stuntman. Just a natural born stuntman, Lawler.
And he wanted to he wanted to aim it at Eddie Marlin. But Eddie, of course, couldn't have got out of the way. The police came and wanted to arrest Eddie.
Oh,
you
really?
know that, right?
No,
yeah.
I didn't know that.
Because the fans called in on Eddie that he'd run over Lawler, and it was like a attempted murder. And they went over there and they pulled into the parking lot, came into the station and talked to Eddie. So, what?
No, I had no idea.
You didn't know that?
No, I didn't know they tried to arrest him. I know they arrested Billy Joe Travis that time, but I didn't know the Eddie one. But
yeah, that was another deal. But they wanted to arrest Eddie. They really did.
We'll go through that. We'll save that for the full story. We'll try. I don't have the technology at the moment.
We haven't seen that already. I thought we showed that.
I'm not sure. We did with Billy Joe Travis, but I'm not sure about Eddie Gilbert. Yeah, everybody write into us and let us know if we've done that already. But otherwise, we'll continue with this. But as I say, there's a car there. car in Memphis. Now we're going back to a car again. So there's the Perry, Jack Perry says it's real glass, cry me a river, score at Wembley. And then Punk confronts, and his sort of quote here chokes Perry a little bit. He doesn't punch him. And he says that's his way of being professional, which is, I mean, really your way of being professional is just yell at him or something. But apparently, he had to choke him a little bit. Samoa Joe tells him to stop, and he does.
You know what I would have done? Okay, I'm thinking.
Yeah.
Wrestlers are great at working scams. If he'd have grabbed me like that, I would have went down. I would have stayed down. I'd have been transported to the hospital on the gurney. I'd have let them check me in. I'd stay 3 or 4 days. And I would say he hurt me. And who would be responsible for that?
The company.
Yep.
The building, the city.
And I'd have a hell of a lot better slot than I had before with more money. So, and I don't know why he didn't do it. I think it surprised I'm gonna call him Jungle Boy. It surprised Jungle Boy too. But I would go to sleep tonight always believing that Punk wanted to get fired.
I think you're right. I mean, he's already said that he wanted to quit after the brawl out thing, so he definitely wanted to quit on this, and he knew it wouldn't work. So I think you're probably right.
Okay, in the match,
yeah,
immediately following the Jack Perry incident,
yeah.
Punk went out to work with Samoa Joe.
He did, yeah.
And how was that match? You were there.
It was good. I think it was the best match on the card. Everyone else disagrees.
So that just goes to show you, Punk, he knows what he's doing. He knows, and he's the type that he builds that connection with the fans, and he's got them. They just like him, and he went out there and he had a match after having a scuffle. I call it a scuffle in the dressing room. And who went over in that match?
Punk.
Mm-hmm.
So therefore, which I always thought was funny that Samoa Joe loses clean in the opener. And then 6 months later, less than 6 months later, he's the champion.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't think that made, I mean, you couldn't really predict that, I guess, but,
Well, what would you have done in that first match? I don't think that should have been the first match, really.
No. I think the reason it was the first match is because, once again, it's the first combined pay-per-view after, Punk and the EVPs have to be separated, and they've all got to have separate locker rooms. And the reason why Punk was on first was so that he could get in there and get out, and then the EVPs could do their stuff later. It's all just high school crap, basically, isn't it?
And who at what doorstep does this responsibility stop at?
With Tony Khan's, of course, and
right, absolutely.
And here we go with Tony Khan. Apparently, Punk then. We don't know if he put his hands on Tony Khan or just yelled at him. I mean, he might have grabbed his lapels or something. I don't know.
Who put his hands on who? On Tony Khan?
Punk on Tony Khan. The one thing
I
that
thought he just yelled at. I think he just yelled at him.
We might have just yelled at him for all I know. But the Punk then leaves later. Just makes the security guard's job easier and just says, "Don't worry, I'll go. I'll just leave because I'm just done with the company anyway." Essentially, he tells Tony Khan that he quits. Tony Khan then fears for his life, which is,
he says what now?
He fears for his life.
Yeah.
Tony Khan. And, he didn't do anything to stop bad feelings festering after brawl outs. We could go so much further into this, but it's nothing that we haven't talked about before, as far as who's in the right, who's in the wrong. And we'll talk about more about that in a minute. But, Punk scoffs that he was fired because he said he quit, and that the fights happen a lot in the back, and it's not really that huge of a deal. It's sort of almost like blowing off steam, especially in the old days, and basically hints that Tony Khan is a delicate little flower. The only thing I really hope was that Ariel Helwani,
I'm going to take that. You called him a delicate flower. I'm going to actually send it to him. I'm going to send the link to him that you
You
call him
shouldn't.
a delicate little flower.
Yes, but if you do that, he may fear for his life again.
Yeah, maybe.
So, also, Punk says again and again that Tony Khan is not a real boss and that he's a clown and a joke, and that AEW isn't a real business because it's not concerned about ticket sales or booking or compelling storytelling or making a profit. Simply, Tony puts matches together that he wants to see, and then he gauges the success of his business by star ratings or cagematch.net fan voting.
Mm-hmm.
Dave Meltzer rebutted on Wrestling Observer Radio that building a company over putting matches together that he wants to see is not a crime, which it isn't a crime, but it's not really that great of a comeback either, to be honest. Punk says that what works on indies doesn't work nationally, maybe in bits and pieces, but not all the time. And this has been proven again and again with AEW because they keep going to, they return to markets and they sell less tickets every time. So whatever it is, they are not giving fans what they want.
Well, something's wrong there. So people know how I feel about it, but he needs to be a boss. He needs to be in charge of everything. Now, the bad boy at the moment, Vince McMahon, was in charge of everything. So if you had a bitch and you wanted to talk to anybody, don't talk to an agent. Don't talk to somebody else. You got to go directly to Vince. Of course, a lot of times you're blocked from going to Vince because people figure out what you're going in there for. That was Bruce Prichard's job, to run interference and keep guys away from Vince.
Or
They
John
would go to
Laurinaitis.
say what now?
Or John Laurinaitis, because talent VP. Yeah.
And it would be stopped there because they damn sure wasn't going to bother Vince with anything they considered less than critical. And I don't know, the only thing that was critical, I think, I've told this story before. I was trying to talk to him, and I think it was in Chicago. And Punk, he waited all day, and they went into that Vince's office, and they talked this whole time. Still didn't work it out. But at least Punk followed protocol. He followed the chain of command until he got to the top guy. But nothing changed. So what else was he going to do?
This leads into the Colt Cabana stuff. So Cabana went up to him to a show at one point in AEW and asked to talk to Punk, and Punk refused, saying he will never speak to him unless there's a lawyer present. So this all stems from issues between their getting sued by WWE and Dr. Chris Heyman over suggestions of medical malpractice on Colt Cabana's Art of Wrestling podcast. And then Punk didn't want to pay Colt's legal fees after a certain point. And then Cabana said that Punk had given him a verbal agreement that he would pay the legal fees. And then Cabana then sues Punk. And then apparently, according to Punk, he offered mediation. He even offered a payout to Colt Cabana, and Colt refused them both. And the sort of relationship deteriorated from there.
How did that situation end up?
I don't think Colt won, best I can tell, and I don't want to speak out of school.
Didn't they go to a private conversation just between them?
No.
And still nothing was done?
No.
I think
no.
Punk offered to do certain things, and I don't know, I think Colt Cabana turned him down, or
seems so. So have you hung about with Colt Cabana at all? I don't know where he and you would have crossed paths.
Colt Cabana and me?
Yeah.
Well, we didn't really cross paths. We did, but he come to see me when he had a podcast. He wanted me to do a podcast, and he called, and I went, yeah, I guess. And I forgot where I was, but he come and met me. We were on the road, and he come and met me, and we went to, he staying in the same hotel that I was staying in. And we went to his room, and we did the podcast. So, and that's the only, I think I met him one other time. But when you're doing a podcast with a guy, you get to know him just a little bit, and I talked to him, and he fine with me. So
I hate to say this, I'm going to
let
speed
me
it up.
ask you this.
Yeah.
Didn't Punk have a growth on his back?
Yes. So that was the original complaint, that there was like some great big growth on his back that the doctors kept allegedly ignoring her to the point it's like a big cyst or something like that. And that was part of the lawsuit that
And
WWE brought
so
against him.
how did Colt get involved in this? Because
It was Colt's podcast.
Yeah.
So therefore he was the
he had Punk on his podcast.
Yeah. And
So the doctor ended up suing them.
Yeah.
I know that doctor. What's his name?
Chris Amon, or a man.
Yeah, I know him. He was there all the time. But I remember, not when he sued him, but I remember meeting him. He was there every week.
We're nearly at the end of the script. Honestly, I'm dropping off tired now, so I'll speed through this quickly. This is probably what has caused the issues between the EVPs and CM Punk, because they're all friends with Colt Cabana, and then Adam
the Scrum.
Page. It's before the Scrum. In fact, it's Adam Page, because he's also friends with Colt Cabana. According to Punk, do you remember this promo, this face-to-face interview they did in the ring? And then CM Punk said there was always like a line that Adam Page threw in that basically called Punk a cancer to the locker room who nobody likes, and he's selfish and blah, blah, blah. Essentially, Punk said that Adam Page went entirely off script, did an entirely different promo than Punk was prepared for, and Punk couldn't come up with a rebuttal because all the lines he prepared didn't match anything that Adam Page had said about him.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm trying to think, is this, to your mind, or has this ever happened before, where you think one thing's going to happen, but then one person's got a beef with another, and they just absolutely tear you apart? Not to you, but
no, never. Because that's the way we learn to do interviews, off the top of your head. Before I got to WWE, nobody ever handed me a piece of paper and says, "Say this." I said, "Get the hell out of here. I'll do my own interview, and I'll sell it better than what you could come up with." Those writers, I think sometimes writing words down, if you can write it all, you can write down a brief argument. Me and Lawler used to go out on Memphis TV, and Jerry Jarrett would say, "Just shoot it. Just talk. Just argue with him." He said, "You're a hell of an arguer, Dutch, and Lawler is too. So you argue back and forth, and he'll say something, you'll say something, he'll come back, you'll come back. And finally, you work it up. And, when you see two guys arguing, and now the audience, they're starting to pick up on it. They're getting a little louder. They're getting a little more aggressive. And then when it broke out at the end, they were ready for it. I would rather do interviews like that. See, I started to go off script one time. We had John Cena in the ring with me and Swagger, and he goes off script all the time. So I wanted to then, but I said, I better not. I better stay with what they got prepared, because I don't even think the writers was even prepared for what I was going to say. But I'm going to let Cena do his deal, because he's a hell of a lot more important than I am. So, but the only time I did a scripted interview ever was in WWE. And that's when I did it. That's when they wrote you. They would hand you, read this, say this, say this, say this. But a lot of times I would go out there and I would they wanted you sometimes to do it word for word. I can't do that. First of all, my attention span is not good enough. It wasn't then, it's still not. but I can get the point across the same way, and I get it across the way that I want to say it. People understand it. And the writer was out there trying to win a Pulitzer Prize for writing, I guess. It just goes on and on and on. Say you're going to beat the guy's ass, okay? That's all you got to say and mean it. And the people, hopefully, they pick up on it. So,
I was thinking, so apparently Tony Khan had actually said, there's real life tension between CM Punk and Adam Page. And apparently in Tony's mind, that, a bit of tension, a bit of real life tension between rivals is a good thing. And he may have even likened it to Shawn Michaels and Bret Hart. And it's like, well, what happened at the end with Shawn Michaels and Bret Hart? They got into a real fight, and
yep.
then Bret Hart got ousted from the company after a major screw job.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like history's just basically repeated itself there. So a real fight broke out, brawl out, and then nobody's happy. There's one thing I want to bring up, and then I'll just speed through the rest. He talks about brawl out, CM Punk with Tony Khan wide-eyed and nodding, basically agreeing with him. I think CM Punk said, "This
At
is
the
nothing but
scrum.
the scrum, your favorite."
Oh, God.
He says that apart from the fact that we've both said this, press scrums in pro wrestling is stupid
No
because
kidding.
you basically just go out there, you've perpetrated 3 hours of a story or 4 hours of a story on a show, and then you go out in front of filmed and just say, well, we worked this and we worked that, and this is what we're going to be doing next, and it's all anyway. But the thing that pleased me the most is when he mentioned that press scrums in pro wrestling are totally stupid, as he said, and then people in the audience asking the questions are a bunch of clowns with a few followers on Twitter getting credentials from AEW, and some better known wrestling journals who also there who felt who Tony Khan must have felt were pro AEW. And I can personally confirm that this is a fair comment because I know for a fact that, or I'm pretty sure I know for a fact anyway, that Tony Khan was giving press credentials to people with like 200 Twitter followers and like no listens to their podcast, essentially because he never said anything negative about AEW publicly, so therefore they were green lit. And that was
That means that you couldn't go into a scrum.
No,
AEW. I couldn't either.
No, it's because we've been honest.
Well, isn't that like censorship?
Sort of, yeah.
Yeah.
It's almost like censorship by omission.
Yeah, censorship, but not letting you show up.
Yeah, but I've heard that there are internal, not even like bots or something like that. There are people out there who are either very pro AEW or who may even work for AEW, who search for people who make negative comments on AEW and then like bot them to death.
I heard the same thing.
Yeah, that kind of thing. And especially if you've ever said anything negative about AEW like we have, and we're not saying it to be negative, we're saying it because we believe that's the truth, then that's completely unacceptable. So yeah, it's a total Soviet kind of thing they've got going on there.
Somebody wrote me and it says, why don't you go to AEW and help them? You couldn't melt and pour me in AEW. Well, you could if you pay me enough money, but I think, I don't care how much money they paid you, I think it's too much of a headache. Because you're out there and you'd have to go in and do a complete hatchet job, and you'd have to clear the decks and then restart. And that takes time. And I don't think they have that much patience. Plus, it's really being a booker, if it's all going good, it's the creative team. Or no, it's the wrestlers making it good. But you got the same wrestlers when it's not doing good, but all of a sudden it's not them anymore. It's the creative. They don't know what they're doing.
Yeah,
but when you do something good, creative doesn't get the credit, and when it's doing bad, you get all the blame. It's a thankless job. It really is.
Definitely. Very quickly, NDA in place, so we can't talk about Brawlin. Says he doesn't regret his time in AEW, and the positives outweigh the negatives. He gives a shout out to MJF and said he did great stuff in AEW until he started pandering to the internet crowd. And then some
Mhm.
additional notes is guaranteed money is a problem in the business because it stops the wrestlers from striving to earn more money by drawing more. He said he considered a return to WWE a few years ago while doing the Fox post-show review shows. He says
Mhm.
his triceps tear is healing far better than the first tear. He's very happy in WWE and doesn't now care if he doesn't headline a WrestleMania. But because it's now a 2-day event, there's a better chance for him to do that. So that's pretty much the whole thing. And Dutch, on that note,
Oh, let me ask you this before we go.
okay.
Will we see him at WrestleMania?
Yeah, he's doing commentary for Seth Rollins and Drew McIntyre on night 2.
Oh,
So
that's
he
good.
should be present.
Do you think that he will make any kind of make his presence felt, so to speak?
Will I? Probably. I mean, why would you have him there otherwise?
Well, he don't have to do nothing. He could just be there on. I mean, not his presence felt up, but I'm thinking with the Drew McIntyre
Yeah. Well, it's not going to be like Mercedes
and him.
Moné where they just dump her out.
Actually, he has a riff with McIntyre and Seth Rollins. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's a booker's dream. You could put him with anyone
Mm-hmm.
in the upper echelons and it makes sense. You could put him with The Rock.
Could.
You could put him with Cody. You could put him with Roman. You could put him with Drew. You could put him with Seth. You could put him with, I don't know, have a rematch
Okay,
with Randy Orton.
who would have thought that when we were talking about TKO and Endeavor taking over WWE, and right when they took over, that's when it went, it exploded. Now, they could have done that with Vince there if he'd allowed it to happen. But Endeavor stepped back and let Triple H do it, and it took off. He said, like you said, it's red hot right now. Everywhere they go, sells out. And it is an Attitude Era 2.0, especially if they do the cursing, now the blood, and different shows.
So
And
say the women are half naked anyway. So you don't need to do they wrestle half naked, which is brilliant. So you've got they're ticking off all 3 of the boxes: blood, swearing, half naked women. Let's do it.